at speeds topping 200 miles per hour. His name is Dale Earnhardt.
This season, Ryan Newman had 4 straight finishes of 39th or worse. That streak began right here at Talladega in April with a very wild ride.
They were champions, fan favorites, titans of speed and thunder on the oval. But instead of riding off into the sunset at the top of their game, some of NASCAR's greatest drivers stuck around just a little too long. Maybe it was the love of the sport, maybe it was the addiction to the adrenaline, or maybe they just didn't know how to let go. Whatever the reason, the legacy of some legends was slightly smudged, not ruined, but redefined by a few extra seasons that didn't quite live up to the names on the door. This video is not about disrespect. It's about the truth, about timing, about what happens when greatness doesn't know when to say goodbye. Here are 15 great NASCAR drivers who, for better or worse, overstayed their welcome. 15. Ryan Newman.
The checkered flag waves first over Ryan Newman. Ryan Newman does his talking on the track. He's celebrating in victory lane.
Ryan Newman was once one of the fiercest competitors in NASCAR. Early in his career, he racked up poles at a ridiculous pace and was a weekly threat to win. He nearly captured a championship in 2014 in one of the most underdog playoff runs we've seen. But after that, the decline was steady. By the late 2010s, Newman was running mid-pack and surviving on grit. After his terrifying crash in the 2020 Daytona 500, many assumed it would be the end. But he came back, tough as ever. Still, his performance had faded, and when he finally stepped away in 2021, it felt like the end of a long, quiet farewell tour. Admirable? Yes, but a little too long? Probably. 14. Bobby Allison.
This is Bobby Allison, a factor in every race he enters.
Standing on the throttle, Bobby Allison takes first place.
Bobby Allison is one of the sport's all-time great, a Daytona 500 winner, a champion, and a fierce competitor. But by the late 1980s, age and injuries had begun to take their toll. In 1988, a near-fatal crash at Pocono ended his career in the most tragic of ways. But even before that, there were signs that Allison wasn't the driver he once was. He was still competing, still pushing, but many felt the risks outweighed the results. His crash serves as a somber reminder of just how brutal this sport can be, especially when a driver doesn't know when to step out of the seat. 13. Dave Blaney.
Dave Blaney has climbed himself quietly up to third place.
The Buckeye Bullet was a dirt track superstar with high hopes when he entered NASCAR, but his Cup career never really took off. Despite over 470 starts, Blaney managed only one top 5 finish.
He often drove for underfunded teams and was rarely in competitive equipment.
But he kept showing up. Even into his 50s, Blaney was still grinding. It was clear he loved the sport, but the results didn't follow. Sometimes it wasn't about overstaying success, but overstaying in general. 12. Mike Wallace.
Labonte looking for season win number 3 in the white car, and just up ahead, Mike Wallace trying to win his first ever.
Mike Wallace never had the career his brother Rusty had, but he was a respected journeyman. He made a name for himself in the Xfinity and Truck Series, and occasionally popped up in Cup. But by the 2010s, he was mostly running with backmarker teams. His final attempt at a return in 2020 didn't go well, both on and off the track. A controversial social media post led to his suspension, and just like that, his long and winding career ended not with a bang, but a cloud. In hindsight, he probably should have called it a career years earlier. 11. David Rudman.
Meet David Rudman, the man who's replaced Michael Waltrip as driver of the Aaron's Dream Machine.
Rudman had a short but memorable peak. He scored 2 Cup wins with Michael Waltrip Racing and looked like a solid mid-tier threat. But when MWR collapsed, so did his career. He bounced around with BK Racing, Tommy Baldwin Racing, and others, rarely qualifying, often starting parking. It was a steep fall from relevance. Fans who remembered the wins watched him fade into obscurity, wondering why he was still trying. 10. Bill Elliot.
That dashed Waltrip's hopes for a win and opened the door for Bill Elliot to grab the lead.
Awesome Bill from Downstrill is a NASCAR legend and one of the most popular drivers in the sport's history. After stepping away from full-time racing in 2003, Elliot kept returning for one-off starts through 2012. While fans were always thrilled to see him, the performances were nowhere near what they used to be. He was running with small teams, far off the pace. It felt more like a nostalgic cameo than a real shot at success. A legend, no doubt, but one who may have let the goodbye drag on a little too long. 9. Derek Cope.
And there's a driver that you can bet kind of is glad that 1991 is over. It hasn't been nearly as successful a season as Derek had hoped.
Derek Cope will forever be known for his shocking 1990 Daytona 500 victory. But what followed was a decades-long journey of underwhelming results and backmarker rides. He continued to race part-time well into his 60s, making his final Cup start in 2021, where he crashed out early and finished dead last. Admirable determination? Sure. But Cope's later years were more about hanging on than competing. 8. Terry Labonte.
The winner is whichever car got to that start-finish line first and got to the yellow flag first. And right now I think we have to assume it's Terry Labonte.
A two-time Cup Series champion, one of the most respected drivers of his generation, Terry Labonte had a quietly dignified career until the very end. After stepping away from full-time racing in 2004, he continued to make occasional starts through 2014. But these were mostly with low-budget teams where he ran deep in the field. His final races were less about competing and more about completing laps. A quiet ending for a quiet champion, but one that didn't quite match the glory of his prime. 7. Sterling Marlin.
Sterling Marlin in front, Ernie Irvan closing ground.
Sterling Marlin was a tough, no-nonsense racer and a legitimate title contender in the early 2000s.
But after suffering a neck injury in 2002 that derailed his momentum, he never really got back on track.
He continued racing with smaller teams for several years, often finishing outside the top 30. He had flashes of brilliance, but it was clear the injury had changed things. His determination was inspiring, but his results told a different story. 6. Ken Shrader.
And at the stripe, it is Ken Shrader who made his unquestionably correct move.
It's a photo for third.
Ken Shrader was a blue-collar racer to the core, a fan favorite and a staple of the Cup garage throughout the 90s and early 2000s. Shrader continued racing Cup cars through 2013, often with severely underfunded teams. While he still had success in ARCA and short tracks, his Cup performance in his final years were rough. He was often laps down, simply filling fields long after his days of contending had passed. 5. Bobby Labonte.
Here comes Labonte. Bobby Labonte is the NASCAR Winston Cup champion for 2000.
The 2000 Cups champion had a brilliant run with Joe Gibbs Racing, but his decline was swift and painful to watch. After leaving Gibbs, Labonte drove for a string of struggling teams and never found competitive equipment again. His final years in the Cup Series were spent outside the top 25, far from the front where he used to thrive. A class act and a champion, but one whose career faded slowly rather than ending with fireworks. 4. Michael Waltrip.
Here he is coming off of corner number 4. The checkered flag is waiting, and Michael Waltrip wins the Grand National 200.
Michael Waltrip's story is bittersweet. He was never the most consistent driver, but he had his moments, especially his 2 Daytona 500 victories. But 2005 post, the magic was gone. He continued to show up for superspeedway races through 2017, often with little to no chance of winning. Fans appreciated the nostalgia, but it was clear he was no longer competitive. By the end, it felt like he was hanging on for tradition, not trophies. 3. Richard Petty.
Checkered flag for car number 43. Richard Petty has won the 200th race of his incomparable career.
Yes, even the king makes this list. Richard Petty is the winningest driver in NASCAR history, but his final years were rough. From 1984 to his retirement in 1992, Petty went winless and often struggled to qualify. His farewell tour in 1992 was a marketing triumph, but a performance disaster. He was rarely on pace and usually finished well outside the top 20. Petty's greatness can't be questioned, but his ending was hard to watch. 2.
Mark Martin.
Oval at Rockingham, North Carolina, and Mark Martin, 30-year-old driver from Batesville, Arkansas. He sees the checkered flag ahead in the hands of Harold Kinder. He receives the checkered flag. Mark Martin.
Mark Martin is the most complicated case here. He was still competitive into his 50s, finishing second in the 2009 championship with Hendrick Motorsports. But after multiple retirements, he kept returning for part-time stints with Michael Waltrip Racing and Stuart Haas Racing. The issue wasn't his skim, it was the lack of finality. Fans never knew if he was racing or retired. It slightly diluted an otherwise legendary career that deserved a clearer final chapter. 1. Morgan Shepard. No one defines Overstayed like Morgan Shepard. At 72 years old, he was still starting NASCAR Cup races. In 2014, he made headlines after spinning Joey Logano at New Hampshire, prompting safety concerns and debates about age limits. His passion for this sport was unmatched, but at some point it became dangerous. Shepard wasn't just racing past his prime, he was racing past reason. A beloved figure, no doubt, but a cautionary tale too.
Racing is in their blood. For every one of these drivers, stepping away wasn't easy because NASCAR wasn't just a job, it was identity, purpose, life. But even legends can stay too long at the dance. Some went out quietly, some stayed until they were barely recognizable behind the wheel, and a few might have damaged their legacy just enough to make us wonder, what if they had walked away sooner? So what do you think? Which driver overstayed their welcome the most, and which ones deserved a better ending? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dive NASCAR content.